Welcome to the Mindfully Masculine podcast with Charles and Dan, where we take a conscious, holistic, and direct approach to relationships, mental health, and self-improvement. For additional content, visit our website at mindfullymasculine.com. And to interact with us, our guests, and your fellow listeners, join the Mindfully Masculine group on Facebook.
Good morning, Charles.
Good morning, Dan. Happy Friday. How are you?
Happy Friday. I'm great. I woke up a little bit earlier than expected today. Not sure why, but I'm not complaining.
How early is a little bit early?
4:30.
4:30?
Yeah, that was
nice.
Yeah, normally I'm up at 6, and then like yesterday I needed to sleep till 7. So I don't know. I mean, I went to bed at a decent hour, I guess. And I slept a little bit deeper. I think what it is normally I don't sleep very well. And so then I need a really long time. But then the few times when I sleep really deeply, my body's like, all right, you're done. You don't need to be in bed anymore. And it wakes me right up. So I took a little extra melatonin last night, and I did a run at the gym instead of outside because the weather wasn't so nice. And I think maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know.
Well, I'll share my slightly different experience. My alarm went off at 4:30 this morning, and I was still awake from the evening before.
Wow, must have been a great time.
That tells you the kind of responsible podcaster I am.
You know what else tells me you're a responsible podcaster? You're still doing it from a different background there. So
so last time
you'd like to change out your backgrounds. That's very nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Last time I was in a hotel. Right now I'm on an Airbnb over in Tampa.
Yeah.
And I went to a comedy show last night and saw one of my, top 10 easy comics. And he put on a good show. He was very funny. And,
who is that?
His name's Joe List.
Okay.
Yeah. He also has a podcast, but only listen to him after you've listened to all of our stuff, obviously.
Yeah. How was it? He was good.
He was real good. Yeah. It's crazy. Just the biggest difference, most comedy shows, at least at Side Splitters in Tampa, which is my favorite club to go to. You got a host who does, maybe 10 minutes of comedy. Then you've got a middle comic who does probably around 20, 25 minutes, maybe half an hour. And then the headliner does an hour. And one of the things I've always noticed is just the confidence level of the headliners. Like it's almost always clear, like, okay, this is why they're the national or international touring comedian. Just they stand up there, and no matter what's happening in the audience, and the confidence is just overpowering. And it's so much more fun to watch a confident comic than it is somebody who's still trying to get used to it. You know what I mean?
So is that why Side Splitters is your favorite, because the talent that they have there, or is there something more about the venue that you like better than here in Orlando?
That's a good question. So no, it really, for me, is all about who they choose to book at Side Splitters. They book sort of younger, more like internet popular comedians that I like better. And so like all my favorites, when they come through Central Florida, sometimes they hit the Improv in Orlando, but they almost always hit Side Splitters in Tampa. So and since, one of my clients is over here in the Tampa area, I'm usually able to work it out so that I can work during the day and then go at night for a show.
Nice. Where in Tampa is Side Splitters? Are there other venues nearby, like restaurants and bars? Stuff? Would that be
I believe it's considered
the night out?
I think it's considered the Carrollwood area. So it's on Dale Mabry, north of the stadium where the Bucks play, if that gives you any idea.
Okay.
So it's, you kind of hit downtown Tampa, then go north for, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 miles. And, there's a lot of just, chain restaurants and strip malls and stuff like that. So whatever, whether you're in the mood for Chipotle or Chili's, you can find something.
Wow.
They also serve food. They also serve food there. And the food in the restaurant is, they don't really serve entrees. It's more just like appetizers and desserts and lots of fancy drinks.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever been to a comedy place that actually serves real food instead of just bar stuff? I haven't.
No, I don't think I have either.
Yeah. I think you're asking for too much if you want like a gourmet meal and,
and
the funny comedians.
The best you can hope for is kind of like sports bar menus, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's been my experience. Yeah. For sure. 2 drink
It
minimum.
was fun. I had a good time. So I'm going to be headed back toward Orlando here in a little bit.
Excellent. 2 drink minimum, I'm assuming.
2 item minimum.
2 item. Okay, great.
So I had a bottle of water and a coffee.
Ooh.
Yeah, I was really breaking out the wallet last night.
Yeah. As you tend to do. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So what are we going to do this weekend? We're going to do something Saturday, right? We haven't really talked about it.
No, we haven't talked about it. So we're going to need to brainstorm. I've got my dance lesson from 11 to 12, and then you are taking your dance lesson from 12 to 1 on
12
Saturday.
to 1. That's right. Starting the cha-cha tomorrow.
Cha-cha. Yeah. I'll be doing intermediate hustle and to continue my my hustle lessons.
How many lessons do I have to take before I can put Cha-Cha Charlie on the business card?
Well, I think you could do it now. You've already paid for the class.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, the check cleared.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're good. You're good. There's no regulatory commission that's going to be monitoring your signatures.
All right. Then Cha-Cha Charlie it is, which is better than my previous nickname of Twin Chin Charlie back when I was carrying about 40 extra pounds.
Now, that was lovingly given to you by your ex-wife, correct?
It was.
Yeah.
It numbers among the funniest things she said. It makes me laugh every time I think about it.
Twin Chin Charlie. Yeah,
I know.
Really, the rhyming absolutely helps with the comedy there.
It was funny. She made another chin joke that I just remembered that I also thought was really funny. So I worked for a company in New Smyrna Beach, like in 2004, called Brintech, and it was called Brintech because it was founded by a guy named Harold Brewer, and he was in technology. So he said, "I'll call it Brintech."
Okay.
And then so when I went and started my own technology company, Erin suggested, she's like, "You should call it Chintech."
Oh my God.
I was like, "Because my first name is Charles." She's like,
That's
"No,
great.
because of your double chins."
Wow. That's love.
It was great. I really enjoyed it. She made me laugh a lot.
That means a lot.
Yes.
I'm actually, coming to discover how important it is for me to have people in my life that make me laugh. So,
me too.
Yeah. No, I was actually going to pay you a compliment, but now you just ruined it. So F you. So yeah. And you. And
thank you.
I just realized, the people that I tend to have stuck around with in terms of the longest relationships and spent the most time with are the ones that I can laugh the most with and at. So, it's, I was just kind of reminded of that recently as well. So, anyway, let's get into 12 rules for life. Rule 10: be precise in your
start
speech.
early.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I was telling you before we started recording this, for whatever reason, this is a difficult chapter for me. I mean, it's not especially long and it doesn't have a whole lot more big words than the other chapters, but this one is a little difficult for me to sort of follow his line of logic throughout the whole thing. And so I basically just made a bunch of random notes while I was listening to it and after I finished listening to it. And I'm looking forward to sharing those with you as well as responding to all the good ideas that you have and that you picked up from it.
Yeah, sure. Once you get into it.
Okay, so here's the first thing that I thought of. And I've probably mentioned this before. Again, I have an impossible time trying to remember what I've talked about with you over a couple of club sodas and what I've actually said on the podcast before, because we've got, we got 20 plus hours out there now. So, or recorded, maybe not out there, but certainly recorded.
Well, I think it's 18 out there. I was just on a FaceTime with my dad and his girlfriend, Bev, and we were talking about that. And he's just like, well, I've listened to my episode and the one with Renata, but I don't know how many more do you have out there? And I looked, I'm like, I don't know. Let me take a look. And I was like, 18. I was like, holy cow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
And they average an hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes a piece.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So that all said, this is something I've shared before, which is the idea that, what we look at as humans as reality is based on what we understand through the 5 evolved senses we have that got us out of the trees and into the savannah. Right. And so to assume that perception is the way reality really, really is seems kind of silly to me. Like there's got to be other stuff going on that we just don't need to know to stay alive. So why would we be able to detect it or perceive it?
Right.
And I don't know what those things are. I mean, that's a metaphysical question that I am not feeling qualified to answer on 35 minutes of sleep this morning.
Yeah. I mean, well, you got 35. I didn't think you got any. Okay.
I tripped it off a little bit.
As long as you don't do it now, that's good. That's good. Yeah. I mean, I think, to survive is different than to thrive and to, optimize.
Certainly.
And take our lives and reality to the next level. Right. And so right. I think we're at the point of where, I think those five senses were important to, carve out a reality that we perceive to survive. But those other things that you're talking about that we can't, measure, detect, understand yet, I think that stuff's kind of like the cherries on top, the bonus, the icing on the cake that can make things better or, slightly worse. But I don't know if our survival necessarily depends on it.
I don't think it, even our modern view of science, which, I'm a big fan of science, it's still based on the things that humans can understand through our five senses. And so, are there things outside of that? I would imagine there must be, but
well, if you think about it, the whole process of science is discovering those new things, right? Over time, it's been the smallest thing that we could detect at one point was a molecule. And then once we got more powerful microscopes, we're like, oh, wait, there's atoms. Oh, wait, there's like protons and neutrons. And oh, look, there's quarks. And, so, so, that was all.
Right. They're all still constrained by our eyes, though, right? Our eyes, our ears, our noses, our mouths, and our hands.
Correct. So, we use tools to allow us to, well, here's the thing is, right? With our naked eye, we can't perceive that stuff, but
correct. Exactly.
As we develop more technology, more tools, then we basically can bring the understanding of what we can't see into the five senses that we can use. Right. So that's one of the things he actually talks about is we don't, as human beings, see things either as objects or It's or things. We see them either as tools or obstacles. And I was like, that's awesome. That is so insightful to me. I was like, yeah.
And it's impossible for us to separate things from their context, right?
No. I don't think it's impossible. No, I don't think he says it's impossible. What I think is that's not our default. That's how I took it was. Yeah, it's not our default to do that. So when we're driving, when we're driving a car, we aren't thinking about all the things that are happening at that time in terms of how the car is working. And, it's just, we just drive the car because we need to get from place A to place B. And it's not until that car breaks down that we go, wait a minute, well, how does this thing work? Right. And that's at that point, we're forced to look at the complexities and the little details of whatever thing we're using. But as in order for us to make sense of the world, we tend to make complex things very simple and just and remove all of that complexity from our thoughts as we're using or experiencing that tool, right? That car or even with personal relationships. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and that's what we do until there's a problem, right? And then once there's a problem, then we have to look at it in a different way because we come to the realization that, okay, the way I perceive this thing, this relationship, this whatever, I didn't really see it for what it really was. And now I've got to doubt myself and now I've got to re-educate myself. Yeah.
The other day when you were at my house, we're trying to build a computer. We're talking about that a little bit about this chapter. And you mentioned, somebody who, he gives an example of a woman who was, cheated on. And, really it was kind of like a shock when she found out and just what that does to the psyche. And it's not just, well, why don't you get into that? Cause that was, you said it much more eloquently than I did.
Yeah. So in the story that, or I guess it wasn't really a story as much as a hypothetical situation. What he mentions is, a woman who is cheated on by her husband and betrayed, and the reaction that we have to betrayal is, number one, we look at the person that betrayed us and think, okay, they're not who I thought they were. They're somebody else. I spent all this time thinking that they were one person, and then in reality, they were this other person, and I don't know who that other person is. And the person that I thought they were didn't ever actually exist. And so not only is that tough, but it gets even tougher because we also then have the reaction of, I can't trust myself anymore to understand the reality of my surroundings and the people that I choose to be with. So I no longer have any confidence that I can determine truth from, falsehood, and be able to tell the difference between what is real and what's fake. And so it's really a 1-2 punch when you experience that you lose the ability to measure and categorize other people because you've lost that ability in yourself. At least that's what it feels like.
Yeah. So here's a question for her. What do you think it would be more traumatic, or would hurt more, or be more upsetting? The fact that this person isn't who you thought who you thought they were, or that you aren't who you thought you were?
For me, it would definitely be the second option. I mean, the doubting someone else and being proven wrong about someone else feels like something that you can recover from. But, having that flip switch where you no longer trust your ability to keep yourself alive. And that's what we're talking about. I mean, the people you choose to make your family and surround yourself with, once you get to the point that you've decided, I am a poor judge of those people. So the people closest to me may not have my best interest at heart, because I don't feel like I have the ability to make that determination anymore. Yeah. That's got to be brutal. And thankfully I've never lived through that.
Yeah.
But, I know people who have, and it's hard to recover from personally. It's certainly hard to recover the relationship when that happens. I mean, I'm not saying impossible. I've seen it happen on limited occasions, but I mean, I don't know how I could come back from something like that.
So here, I'll share a little personal story about that. One of my longest relationships, that had ended recently, things were good. They were okay. We were just kind of comfortable, but it wasn't, wasn't going really anywhere. Come to find out that, person who I was with had been seeing somebody else and doing things on the side that, when I brought it up during the relationship, and when I was thinking about it, I had suspected something, but because it was easier just to stay than it was to think of, not staying and getting into the unknown, which was more terrifying to me. Not terrifying, but it was just, it was just more comfortable to stay. And then I would kind of accept the reasons that person gave, or I'd accept the lies that person gave. And it was just easier to kind of go along that way. However, it just kept, it festered, it kept bottling, I bottled it up, and it just kept bothering me. And afterwards, when she admitted that, these things did in fact happen, even though she was ending the relationship, I felt relieved. It was a relief to me, because my instincts weren't wrong. So whereas my instincts, because what I had suspected about her was correct. And the other piece of it is, I'm not flawed. There's not something wrong with me. I purposely dismissed my feelings and my instincts. So in a way, I was relieved that I'm not, I don't want to say broken, but that I wasn't somebody that I'm not. Right.
Yeah.
Just kind of like we talked about.
Yeah. 100. Yeah. That must have mitigated your sense of loss by a substantial amount, because you were proved correct. You weren't just blindsided.
Right. And I don't feel like I was gullible or naive, and I have
Yeah.
been told that I've been very trusting in the past from other people as well. I've been told that I'm very trusting, that I can be a little bit naive and gullible, and I look for the best in people and stuff like that, which, can be a little bit dangerous if you're not too careful. And I have been burned, not just from that experience. I've financially been burned in the past significantly by
Mm.
doing that, and ignoring, again, my instincts and my gut. And looking back on it, again, it's a huge financial loss, but
Yeah.
looking back on it after I found out the truth, I'm like, okay, you just need to start paying attention to your gut, and not, and there's not something necessarily that you need to fix, or there's something wrong with you in that respect. So,
Well, Dan, the good news is you just keep hanging out with me. We'll get that cynicism up to an 11. We'll burn all of that naivete and that kindness right out of you.
that's why I like you.
It's the least I could do for my friends.
I appreciate that. So generous of you.
All right. So when Peterson sort of lays out these ideas about things like, reality and objects and tools and all that, he then sort of transitions to the idea that the only way we have to confront this super complex world is through speech, right? Both, the things we think and the things we say. And since speech is really our most powerful tool, when you think about it, our ability to, communicate to ourselves and to others, we have to use it consciously, not just lazily, for lack of a better word. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And he gives the advice that really whatever problem or challenge you're facing, whether that is, your car that won't start or your spouse that cheated on you, you have to define your problem as specifically and carefully as you possibly can, because human problems in human lives are riddled with scope creep, as you and I would say with the projects that we work on.
Right. Yeah. And then, and speech is a powerful tool in terms of shaping reality. So when you aren't precise with that, you are then creating a reality or contributing to a reality that isn't precise. And when you're vague, you really, and he talks about that quite a bit, you can't really solve anything because you're not identifying anything when you're vague, right? One of the things that if in order to solve something, whether you're communicating with somebody or just thinking about something yourself, is you need to be specific in order to have a starting point. And if you don't have a specific starting point that, you agree on, and as well as if you're communicating with somebody else that you both agree on, then there's no way you can move forward, because you need to come together and say, okay, this is what we're working with, and this is where we're working from.
Right. And really that specificity in the things that we say, it's really the only thing we have available to us to kind of move us from the side of chaos over to the side of order. It's, and without specificity, when you're just a boat without a rudder getting tossed around, you can't go anywhere. And specificity can be that rudder where it allows you to set a course and go in the direction that you want to go in. One thing that really stood out to me was the idea that, confronting and defining problems is a bummer. It sucks. It takes a lot of effort and it makes you feel bad the whole time you're doing it. So it's a lot easier in your short term to just pretend like they're not there.
Yeah, that's what I did. My last relationship, I'm like, yeah.
I've certainly done that.
That sounds like a real excuse. That sounds good. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. Not in the same circumstances, but certainly, it's let's just kick the can down the road a little bit and we'll worry about it later. And, whether you do that professionally or do that in your relationships, eventually it catches up to you and the problem is much worse. The other way I was thinking about specificity in this, as he defines it, when it comes to speech, is it's really a weapon we can use against anxiety.
In what way?
Because the unknown future is just so big. But when we start making plans and setting goals, the idea of here's where I want to be in 20 years. And if I'm going to be there in 20 years, then I got to be here in 10 years. And if I want to be there in 10 years, then I got to be here in 5 years, all the way down to here's what I have to get done before the end of the workday if I want to get my way there. And obviously, you can't plan everything out, but you can reduce the level of unknown and the level of anxiety by saying, okay, here are the gates I need to walk through on my way to where I want to be.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I mean, I like the way you said that. The unknown, you're eliminating the unknown. And that's, one of the reasons, why a lot of people stay in relationships is because they're walking into an unknown. Whereas if you thought things through a little bit, plan things down and go, all right, you know what? It's not so unknown now. There's some more parameters around that, where I'm going in the next year or what the options are. And that holds true with jobs too. If you're not happy with your job, whatever relationship we're talking about with another person, with a job, with your house, with your neighborhood, with your family, all these things are applicable here.
Yeah, one of the things that one of the exercises that you and I have done together before, and I've been doing on my own for a while, and I don't know who I stole it from, but credit to them. The idea of when you're confronting an unknown situation where it's a problem, it's a challenge, you don't know how it's going to turn out. I like to do this exercise where you map out, okay, what's the best thing that could happen? What's the worst thing that could happen? And what's the most likely thing to happen? And then you evaluate, okay, is most likely closer to the bad thing or is most likely closer to the good thing? And that can be your guide to, okay, should I engage on this at all? I mean, if the most likely outcome is next door neighbors with the worst possible thing that could happen, maybe it's time to back off and not do whatever you're thinking about doing.
Yeah. No, I like that because then it gets it out of your head too. So it's out on paper and then your brain stops ruminating about,
right.
And it's not going to ruminate about the most likely thing. Right.
No,
it's weird. Our brains don't do that or necessarily the best thing. We're pre-wired to protect ourselves. So it's always going to be like the worst thing, usually that our brain is constantly thinking about. So I like the fact that you get that out there somehow. And then you also present other options. So now our brain is going, okay, you know what? It's, let's think this through and if you do come up with that and I always recommend do this with somebody you trust, do this with a friend, do this with a therapist if you've got access to any of those things, because two heads are better than one. But yeah, certainly if that most likely is way too close to the worst case scenario, then you got to stare at the paper for a while and say, okay, well, what can I do instead of this that will move me a little bit closer to the plus side and away from the minus side, and then just keep working on that solution until you're comfortable with where it is on that line. Yeah, to steal Peterson's, right? What could I do that I would do that would slightly improve this or slightly move me forward towards that end state, right?
Yeah, that is one of the most valuable pieces of advice that I've gotten from this book, and really his whole public persona is that idea of, like you said, what's the smallest thing I could do that I would do to make this a little better. And then the other thing that I really like that he says is, just stop doing one thing that is making things worse. It's like, you don't have to start something new. Just stop doing one thing that's making things worse.
Sometimes that's difficult to stop doing something. And
it is.
One of the things that I picked up from my Tiny Habits coaching was that what has shown to be effective with habit change is that you need to replace it with something else, a bad habit or something that you don't like doing. It's much easier if you replace it with something very small rather than just trying to eliminate it. And I forget exactly why. It might be, I'm sure it's related somehow. Our circuitry, our brain basically is tied to, the neurons going, okay, this is what we typically do. And then if you add something else onto it, you're then kind of bundling that the neural circuitry to say that this is not a habit of where I'm just like smoking a cigarette. I'm smoking a cigarette and then I'm doing 2 push-ups. And so eventually you can then you do that enough, you can start to then stop doing the smoking of the cigarettes and you're just doing the push-ups. And it's not as much of a traumatic change because you've kind of you've bundled that habit together. You've added onto it and then you can kind of manipulate and change it a little bit. So It's a bit of an extreme example, but that's something to
think
about.
I look forward to diving into the tiny habits stuff in much more detail on the podcast. I think with your level of experience on that, I think I'm going to really enjoy, doing episodes whilst sitting at your feet being instructed.
Well,
how much are you going to charge me for that?
We'll work that out later. But yeah, so what is cool about that is it's a lot of why behind the tiny habits. So there's a lot of stories behind in that book that show people practically using it. But what was great for me was understanding why it works, and then being able to just try it very easily without any cost, very little cost, if anything. So that would be great if you wanted to do tiny habits.
It's on the list. We'll do it eventually. Cool. It's just a matter of us picking the best. Yeah. Time to put in the rotation.
I want to just touch back on I know that's one of my favorite things. The what could I do that I would do? That would be the smallest way to move forward. For me, I like the fact that he says that I would do, because there's so many things that I go, well, I should do this. I should do that. I have too much should in my life, and I'm trying to fight that, but it gives you that flexibility to go, okay, I don't have to do the most difficult thing or even the most effective thing. I want to do what I would. I'm going to pick what I want to do.
Right.
And that's actually a principle of tiny habits too. Actually talking about that, but so that's why I like that expression.
And that totally makes sense. I mean, if you're trying to build a better life for yourself and you've got to, before you can do that, you've got to walk through a jungle of a bunch of stuff you really don't want to do. You're never going to take step number one to make it happen. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. You gotta put stuff on the path that you're going to enjoy, or you're not going to stick with it.
At least in the beginning. And then once you get some momentum and you get excited from that momentum and the progress that you're making, then you can put in something that's maybe a little bit more challenging, right?
Yeah. Toward the end of this chapter, he did start translating some of this to specific relationship advice. And I saw a ton of overlap with principles from No More Mr. Nice Guy. Did you detect some of that too?
I did.
Yeah. Like the biggest one was, as soon as you realize you have a problem or an unmet need, you have to share it with your partner.
Yes. Yeah.
Because what happens if you don't, then you start building up that resentment, and it gets harder and harder to bring it to their attention. Like Glover tells that story when his wife finally comes, he has a blow up and his wife's like, how long has this been bothering you? He's like, oh, I don't know, 6 months.
Could you imagine how big that, what could have been, what probably was small at the beginning, after 6 months of emotion, and you're just shoveling dirt onto that molehill, and it becomes just this mountain. And when you finally explain it.
Yeah. And essentially you're letting someone you love and that loves you back mistreat you for, in his case, 6 months without telling them that they're doing it. And yeah, why do you think what's the long-term prognosis for that? It's not good.
So I think I've been guilty of that. I'm sure you have too, but why do you think we do that? Why do you think it's so difficult for us to?
Because I can speak to it in general and also as men. As men, I think we have this impulse that if I tell someone, hey, I have a need that's not being met, then we think that that's a form of weakness to say, to actually acknowledge I need other people to do things for me to be happy is not the traditional, but probably false definition of masculinity, or even of stoicism.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's what either of those things are really teaching us. But I think there's certainly a bastardized version of both of those that are in popular culture that say, a man who says, I need help from my wife, my brother, whatever, is a man that doesn't have his stuff together.
Well, what about not necessarily I need help, but I am not feeling good about something, right? Like I've got a need that's not being met in some way. Why do you think we kind of bottle that up? Yeah.
I think it's kind of saying the same thing. It's just, how do you want to say it? What's a comfortable way for you to say it? And the bottom line is you just have to express it in some manner, but you have to do it directly and precisely, which is, getting back to the message of this chapter. When stuff's going on in a way that you're not happy with, you gotta take steps to change it. And people don't like uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Why am I going to choose to be uncomfortable or have an uncomfortable conversation or bring up something that could potentially either make the other person angry, right? Or get me upset or make them upset? Why am I choosing that? It's just put that off. That's not, I don't, let's just talk about that later.
But it's we need to engage the same part of our brain that makes a decision. Hey, if I share some of this woolly mammoth meat with my neighbors, I'll be better off in the long term instead of just eating as much as I can and letting the rest rot. That's the equivalent of, I need to have a difficult conversation with my partner today so that I don't have to, be in a therapist's office 6 months from now dealing with all this resentment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a part of what is good about that book and also this one is that it kind of makes you aware of what that long-term consequence is, or reminds you that it could be much worse down the road. And a lot of times we don't realize that, or we forget how much worse it could be. We're only feeling the immediate fear that our brain is generating right now in that moment. It's difficult to think of the long-term that it could actually be worse.
Yeah, I agree. One thing you and I talked about that we were going to do on a future episode of the podcast, and if it's not this episode, that's fine. Just tell me. The idea of trying to give each of us give one recommendation of what we could do with the knowledge in this chapter, give somebody something they could do today that would put them on a path to a benefit of some sort. Did you come up with something?
I did.
I did too. How about that?
All right, let's do it.
You go first.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
So
thanks.
No worries, man. So earlier in the chapter on page 262, I'm going to read a paragraph where he talks about basically that we also tend to simplify our relationships with people, not just the tools that we use that are really complex. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to read from the book here. When we look at the world, we perceive only what is enough for our plans and actions to work and for us to get by. What we inhabit then is this is enough. That's a radical, functional, unconscious simplification of the world. It's almost impossible for us to not mistake it for the world itself. But the objects we see are not simply there in the world for our simple, direct perceiving. They exist in a complex, multidimensional relationship to one another, not as self-evidently separate, bounded, independent objects. We perceive not them, but their functional utility. In doing so, we make them sufficiently simple for sufficient understanding. It is for this reason we must be precise in our aim. This is true even for perceptions of ourselves, our individual persons. So where I kind of what I took away from this really is that how we interact with people a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this, is I base a lot more value on that relationship with that person based on the current interaction that I'm having with them. And I find that I need to consciously make an effort to remember all the other parts of that person. We've talked briefly about this before, where I've needed to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And but by reading this, it helped me understand that there's not something necessarily wrong with me that I do that. That's just kind of the way humans do, is they simplify things to really the here and now. And so if I'm having an argument with someone or disagree with somebody on a topic, I find myself tending to then, either really like the person or really not like the person. And it takes effort for me to remember the things and the interactions I've had with that person in the past, the other parts of that person, and potentially, what they've shown me in terms of what they think about and how they could potentially act in the future. Right. And so what I've noticed is, in person, it's easier for me to take those other parts of them into account because I see the way they act. I see their body movements. I feel their energy. And he even talks about this in the book, that one of the problems with artificial intelligence was the fact that we couldn't take into account body movements from computers to be able to interpret the world. And so I noticed for myself, I tended to have more or more stronger feelings towards someone in terms of judging them with a with a big blanket, over social media, over text or email, where I am not with that person one-on-one in person and can see their body movements and their facial expressions and the energy that they bring to the conversation. So my takeaway and my advice to anybody out there is just be aware that we have a tendency to simplify things and try not to end relationships or form relationships through just social media, just through email or text. There's so much more to each person and who they are. It's just difficult. It's more difficult to remember that when you're not face to face.
Right.
So Peterson also talks about this. I think you mentioned this is in terms of, previously when we went to see him in person, is there's a lot less people communicating together. So, I mean, even though, Zoom is thankfully we can actually see each other and see our bodily expressions. It's still not quite the same as being in person with someone. So what I took away from this was I need to make an effort, and there's nothing really wrong with me that I'm automatically judging people, but I need to be aware of that. Now that I'm aware of that, it's going to be easier for me to have a little bit more patience with them and myself when it comes to deciding, hey, this person is good for me and somebody I want to keep in my life and have a relationship with and build on, or dismiss. And it also helps me understand that it's more important for me to get out there and spend time with people face to face and not just virtually. So that's my takeaway from this chapter.
Nice. I like it. I find value in everything you said, especially those in-person interactions. I've taken a step back off of social media. I mean, I still post crazy amounts of animal pictures, and I still will. No one will stop me. But man, just getting into arguments with people over news stories and politics and stuff like that, I just don't have the bandwidth for that anymore, because it wasn't the best case scenario. Was I got to feel like I was smarter than somebody else, and I made them look silly. Yeah. And that's like the best possible outcome. And that's not good enough for me to spend my time on.
Yeah. I mean, you've got so many other great things going on right now that, I feel maybe that's part of what's helped you ease off of that, is you've got so many other wonderful things that are making you feel good right now. You don't need that other piece there to feel good anymore. It's not.
Yeah. I think that's legit.
Something like that, maybe.
Yeah, 100%.
That's great.
Okay, so here's my advice. Here's my one thing that I would recommend you try today, if possible. And Dan, I'm giving you this advice too. Uh-oh. And I may even do it myself. I haven't decided to commit yet. So we're recording this on March 25th, 2022. So what I would challenge everyone to do is think of March 25th, 2032, 10 years from now, to the day. And think that you're introducing yourself to somebody at a party, and you're going to say, "Hi, I'm Dan, and I'm a fill in the blank."
I love it.
I want you to fill in the blank. Finish that statement. I'm Dan, and I'm a what? And it doesn't have to be career. It doesn't have to. I mean, it can be career. It can be your family situation. It can be some hobby that you've really gotten into to the point where like that's what you're about. Just pick whatever it is that you want to be about in 10 years. That you would use as an introduction, and write it down and look at it. See how it looks on a piece of paper.
I love it. When are we going to do this homework and for the next podcast? We want to do it at the beginning of the next podcast?
Okay. Yeah, why not?
Let's do it. All right.
I had this great idea, but now I actually have to do it.
Yeah. You can't just assign it to me, my friend. In the world, right? You got to, I think but
all right. Yeah.
I like it. So
next podcast, we'll do it.
Yeah, that's great.
And now neither of us will be obligated to define it any further than just reading this statement. And I reserve the right to not take questions.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
I'm going to put international jewel thief.
That was not my top 5 for you.
Or public intellectual. We talked about that last week.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Anything else?
No, I don't have anything else. So what do you, should we call this rule a wrap, or do we have anything else we want to talk about? What else?
I think I'm good. I covered all the notes that I made, but if you've got any final thoughts, I'm happy to discuss them with you.
No, I think we hit the most important parts of this.
Ooh, gonna give the people a short one then.
I think so.
I think they've earned it.
They have. If you've been sticking with us this long, you've earned a short one from us for sure.
Awesome. I enjoyed it. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for spending time with us on the Mindfully Masculine podcast. If you liked the episode, or you think it would be useful for someone else, please leave us a review and join the Mindfully Masculine group on Facebook. Remember, fellas, don't act masculine. Be masculine.